believe in God?
No.
Do you have any reasons that you think of to be skeptical about the existence of God?
Pretty much just like everything that you see going on around here. Like everyone who's homeless, everyone who's dying.
The Bible was written, 400 years after the events took place? I mean, if somebody tells you a story and then tells you the same story 2 weeks, generally things change, and then we're going to be going over a 4th century period. It's really hard to get things accurate.
It's just something that makes people feel better about their existence.
Good morning. So today we are doing something a little bit different. We're starting a 6-week dialogue on the problem of God. And if you're here and you're a Christian, you're probably thinking, well, I don't think God's the problem. I think God is the solution. But the reality is that so much of our culture doesn't feel that way. And maybe you're here today and that is you. You do see God as a problem. And maybe that's a problem that needs to be understood or solved. Or maybe you see God as a problem that needs to be fixed, but you're not a Christian. Maybe you used to be, but what you learned in Sunday school didn't really measure up in real life. Or maybe you read a book that led you away from faith, and I understand that. Perhaps you're agnostic. And really, the idea of truly understanding God seems like something impossible to grasp. And so you're here, and you just don't know. Maybe you're part of another religion, or you just consider yourself spiritual. Whatever the case, we are glad that you are here today. In fact, I know that for some of you, it probably feels like a risk to even set foot here. So, the problem of God is an age-old question that I believe every person deals with. Everyone on some level has considered God. We've all considered the existence of God, and we all have questions about God. Everyone has questions about God. Regardless of your faith position, you've questioned the existence of God. And unless you've decided that there is no God, you still have lingering questions. It doesn't matter where you've landed. In fact, it doesn't even matter if you've landed anywhere on God and his existence. We all have questions. Christians have questions about God. If you engage your brain, you're going to have questions about God, regardless of your worldview. So what's interesting today is how many people shape their beliefs on what they feel. In fact, for some of you, that's the knock on Christianity. That it's all emotion-based, and it's based on how you feel. It's just a crutch, and it's not really a scientific worldview. It's not an intelligent worldview. It just makes you feel better. And if that's what you need, that's okay. Or maybe you're here and you don't like certain parts of Christianity or certain parts of any religion. So you've kind of made up your own religion, and you've taken a little bit from here and a little bit from there, and I don't really like this, and I can't really go there, so I'm going to take this and I'm going to take that. And if that's you, some of you are there. That's okay. If you were here last Sunday, you heard me say that faith must be based on facts. And that premise remains. And so I want to encourage you, as we go through this series, to shape your beliefs around what's real, not on what you feel. Follow the evidence where it leads, not where you hope it leads. And I believe that this is actually one of the most courageous things that anyone can do. And it's so hard because we all deal with what's called confirmation bias. Confirmation bias. It's a philosophical term. It dates back thousands of years. And back in the 1500s, Francis Bacon, I love bacon, Francis Bacon defined it as this. It is the peculiar and perpetual error of the human understanding to be more moved and excited by affirmatives than negatives. So confirmation bias is this kind of select type of thinking that says, I'm going to have this tendency to overvalue information that confirms what I believe, and I'm going to have this tendency to undervalue or even ignore information that contradicts my beliefs. It's the reason that after we make a major purchase, like a car or you buy a refrigerator, that's not very exciting, but you make a major purchase. It's the reason that you go to websites and you look at the reviews after and you look at the 4 and 5 star reviews. You ignore the 1 star reviews because you want confirmation that you've made a good purchase. We love being right and seeing information that supports our rightness. It's a word. So my encouragement for this series is shape your beliefs around what's real. To follow the evidence where it leads, not where you hope it leads. And there's a perception out there that as soon as you challenge Christianity, it begins to fall apart. And some of that's because Christians don't always do the greatest job of representing our faith. And this leads to a fairly popular view that Christianity is really emotional and that our faith isn't based on rationale or reason. And perhaps the most important part of this conversation, at least for me personally, is that we be careful to have a respectful dialogue around divergent religious points of view. Regardless if those are Christian, atheist, agnostic, whatever religious viewpoint that you have, this is kind of a lost art in our culture. But it's critical for us to be able to fully engage in something like this. We need to respect one another. It needs to be a safe place for us to have this conversation, even if we see the world differently from one another. So, to help us on that journey, we have a book. And this is a book written by Mark Clark. And I came across this book maybe a year ago, and I just kept coming across it until I finally decided I'm going to read this book. And the author is an atheist who became a Christian, and he ultimately is leading a church in Canada. And I just fell in love with this book and the way that the author unpacks some of these really complex ideas. So this series is going to be a combination of some of my own thoughts and our pastor's own thoughts and some of the thoughts presented in the book. But I really appreciated the structure of the discussion. So it's going to be heavily shaped by how he structures this conversation. And we're going to work through several topics addressed in the book, and there should be dates for you behind me on the screen as far as when we're talking about these various topics, and it's on those cards that Pat referred to as well. And so I want to highly encourage you to consider buying the book as a way to go deeper into this. So today, we're going to look at the problem of God's existence. And I want to start with a question. The question is there any evidence that God exists? Outside of the Bible, outside of religious or theological consideration, is there any evidence rationally, scientifically, or philosophically, any evidence that God exists? Now, before we get started, I want to start with a presupposition that I hope puts all of us on a level playing field, and it's this, that everyone has a belief system. That everybody has a belief system. So clearly Christianity is a belief system, right? And I know that's actually what some of you struggle with. Is like, there's this huge leap of faith that's required in Christianity, and I just can't go there. I go with the evidence, and that does not lead me to Christianity. However, did you know that atheism is a belief system? See, while evidence may have led you there, while there's information that would point you towards atheism, there's this gap in information. There's this gap in knowledge where you have to kind of take a leap and say, based on what I know, I believe that this is the best explanation of the universe. So atheism is a belief system. So is agnosticism. There are those of you that would say, I don't know what I believe. And that is a belief system. I don't know is a belief system. Some of you might say, I don't believe in anything. I don't believe in anything is a belief system. And this isn't theological. This is epistemological. This is about the extent of our knowledge. And every philosopher would agree that everyone has a belief system. You have a belief system. You might say, I don't have a belief system. That's your belief system. I don't have a belief system is a belief system. So regardless of your worldview, there are gaps in information that force you to draw conclusions based on the information that you do have. And that is why it's a belief system. So we're all in the same boat here in this regard. Christianity is also a belief system. It's the belief system that I've landed on personally. And it ultimately led me to become a pastor. So I'm a Christian first, and then I'm a pastor. Now, I recognize that there's a big leap from saying, okay, there is a God, and that God is Jesus. And so I think it's smart for us to acknowledge that there is this gap from there is a God, and that gap is Jesus. And we're not going to get there today that gap is Jesus, but we're going to talk about the existence of God. And I believe that God is Jesus. That's where my journey has led me. So everyone has a belief system. There's one other thing that we need to recognize, that many of us are 3 questions away from our belief system collapsing. Many of us, 3 questions away. And this goes for Christians too. When your friend asks you, why do you believe in God? Why do you have a certain position on evolution? And most of us say, I don't know. And that's not good. As a Christian, your faith should be robust. That's just as true if you're an atheist or an agnostic. Not everybody, but for many people, your worldview is just 3 questions away from collapsing. So why do you believe that nothing created everything? Well, I believe in science. Okay, why do you believe in science? Well, I don't know. And it just kind of runs out there. And so our goal for this series is that your belief system would come from where the evidence leads, not where you hope it leads. Because let's all be honest. Each of us came in here cheering for a side. Some of you are cheering for atheism or another religion or Christianity. And I hope that you'll follow where the evidence leads. This goes for Christians too, that you'll follow where the evidence leads, not where you hope it leads. In order to do that, we want to create a dialogue where we're not setting up a straw man, but a steel man. You know the straw man theory? It's creating the worst version of something in order to tear it down. So it's saying Christians are dumb. They don't have any evidence. Science points the other direction. That's a version of Christianity that is really easy to defeat. But some of the greatest minds in history have moved towards theism, towards Christianity. And some of the greatest minds have moved the other direction. So it points both ways. And so when you're thinking this through, don't think of a straw man where you mock the other side. Go instead to what's called steel man theory and produce the best argument against what you believe. So today, we're going to look at two aspects on this debate of God's existence, and the majority of that will be outside of the Bible. We will touch on the Bible for a specific reason, but two arguments, and these arguments have been pivotal in the conversation over the years. So the first is the moral argument. And in order to set the table for the moral argument, we need to talk about metaphysics. Metaphysics. So there's physics, and then there's metaphysics. Physics involves the laws of the universe, but every scientist would also tell you that there's what's called metaphysics. So meta is the Greek word for beyond. And so beyond physics, there are just certain things that physics can't and isn't meant to teach us or to tell us. And those things would be metaphysics. Those things really belong to philosophy or theology. And when you start to look at the things that physics can't answer and isn't meant to answer, it gets really interesting. And these are debates that have gone on for thousands of years. So physics addresses the how, but it doesn't address the why. And that's where philosophy and theology come into play. So I want to start by touching on John chapter 1. John is one of the four accounts of Jesus' life, and he takes the most philosophical approach of the four. And so I want to look at 5 verses in John because I think he's doing something pretty important here that is often missed. And John was addressing those who think about physics and philosophy. He's saying, for those of you that aren't really convinced about the origin of the universe, I think if it's not just a bunch of natural laws, if that's who you are, though, I want to tell you something. I want to show you something. So John says in John 1, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was with God in the beginning. Through him, all things were made. Without him, nothing was made that has been made. In him was life, and that life was the light of all mankind. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. So, in this little section, John repeats this phrase, the Word, several times. What does that mean? So the New Testament was written in Greek, and the Greek translation for the word logos is word. But you'll notice here it has a capital W. Why is it capitalized? Because he's talking about Jesus. But he's also, in this, he's pulling into some philosophical thought. So Stoicism is making a bit of a renaissance nowadays. But in ancient times, it existed. It's actually a really ancient philosophy and was prevalent at this time in history. And Stoic thought always believed that behind the universe was some kind of moral force, that it wasn't Christian or Jewish, and they referred to this as logos. So John is saying the logos showed up. If you want to know what's behind the laws of physics, you wondered what's behind the laws of the universe, you've wondered about the logos, it's here. In addition to that, he says, in the beginning. And these are the first 3 words of the Bible. And so the Hebrew Bible starts with in the beginning. So what John is doing here is he's addressing the Hebrews and the Greeks. And to the Hebrew, he's saying, you know that one true God that we worship? That's Jesus. And to the Hebrew, or to the Greek, he's saying that Jesus is the Logos. He gets Hebrew thought and Greek thought together, and he tells both groups that in the beginning was Jesus. Now, I know we're moving pretty fast today. But John was basically saying, you know that impersonal force behind the universe is Jesus. You know, Hebrews, that one true God we worship, that's Jesus. So he's addressing both audiences. And I know some of you are wondering right now, how is this outside of the Bible? It's not. But I think it's relevant to this conversation because Scripture has always depicted our origin as moral, personal, and relational. Moral, personal, and relational. And so if you want to understand the Christian God, it's moral. It's that God has a viewpoint about you and your life. It's personal, and that person is Jesus, and it's relational. That God isn't just some being that you should be terrified of, but that he has a relationship with you. So, according to Scripture, you're not just some random act. You're not just some random mutation. No, you have purpose. You have meaning. And even if you don't believe that, you're still left with this moral argument, which begs the question, why are we moral creatures? Because for every generation, every civilization, for thousands of years, human beings have emerged as moral creatures. Now, your morality might be different from my morality, or it might be different from the person next to you's morality. But I would suggest that you are a moral creature. If everything is random, if there's no force behind the universe, why are we moral creatures? That's the moral argument. And it's a good question. It's a question that every worldview needs to deal with. But this doesn't really fit into the evolutionary, naturalistic paradigm. At the core of evolution is the idea of survival at the fittest, or survival of the fittest. And so we make our own decisions based on our own self-interest. So if it's good for me, if it helps me survive, I will breed with her, or I will breed with him. If it will help me survive, I will make this choice or that choice, or I won't do this. And that's a basic characterization of evolutionary psychology. So where this becomes a problem is the idea of altruism and kindness. Altruism is the idea that someone else would put themselves at risk for someone else. So, for example, you see a child playing on the light rail tracks, and you see the light rail approaching, and you jump down and you rescue the child. That's an act of altruism because you've put yourself at risk for this child. And if you think about evolution and naturalism, why would you do that? Even simple kindness to others. If you make a lot of money, why would you be generous? Why wouldn't you just do what benefits you? If it's all evolution and naturalism, why wouldn't you just make up your own morality? Why do humans just again and again come back to this idea that life is about something other than just ourselves? Now, I want to share a quote with a famous evolutionist just so you can see kind of where this goes. So, he says, man scans with scrupulous care the character and pedigree of his horses, cattle, and dogs before he matches them. So this is kind of archaic language. It's over 100 years old. But what he is saying is you breed dogs and you breed horses to get a purebred. And this is something that humans have done for thousands of years, right? If you want a dog that hunts and is nice, you breed this dog with this dog. And he continues saying, but when it comes to his own marriage, he rarely or never stakes such care. So his argument here is why don't we have these same considerations in mind when we are considering marriage? Why isn't our goal to create a superior being? He continues saying, both sexes ought to refrain from marriage if they are in any marked degree inferior in body or in mind. So if you're thinking about marrying someone, but he has a deformity, or you're thinking of marrying someone and she has a disease, but you're healthy, He's saying, do not marry that person. And this is the same line of thinking that birthed eugenics. And if you study the rise of Nazi Germany, this is exactly what happens when one race thinks of themselves as superior to another. This is how millions of Jews were exterminated. And so this is a basis for discrimination. Now, who said that? Charles Darwin. That's a quote from The Descent of Man. And I know you're probably saying, like, that's not fair. Like, that was written over 150 years ago. I don't believe that's true. I don't subscribe to that thinking. That's not okay. But that's exactly the point. Why don't you believe that? What's the basis for that? If there's no moral force behind the universe, why are we moral creatures? Why is it that there's something inside of you that says, that is horrible, that's disgusting? Why is it that there's something in you that says there's dignity in diversity, that there's value in other people groups, in other races? Why is there something in you that says that we should care for the poor and the vulnerable? Why is that? Why are you moral creatures? If there's no moral force in the universe, why? Why do you, even if you're an atheist, have your own moral standard? Why? Because if it's just random, if it's just an explosion and there's no moral force behind it, why do we keep surfacing as moral creatures? And this is exactly what led C.S. Lewis, a devout atheist, to become a Christian. This argument, apart from anything else, has led some of the greatest thinkers in humanity to move towards Christianity, towards theism. And again, there are some who've moved the other way. But that's the moral argument in a nutshell. So in addition to the moral argument, there is a cosmological argument too. And so what does this mean? As we consider Earth's origin story, it's not a Marvel movie. It's Earth's origin story. I don't want to get too far into this because we're going to talk about science next week. But as you look at the origin of the universe, it has widely been agreed, whether you're a theist or atheist, that anything that comes into existence has a cause. So many of you are parents. Where did your kids come from? It's not like you came home from work one day and said, "Whoa, kids, how did that happen?" No, you know, the lights were low, the music was playing, and 9 months later, kids. Or if you own a business, it's not as if one day you just woke up and, whoa, there's a business. No, you started the business. In fact, you've worked your tail off to start that business. There's a cause for our kids' existence, and ours as well, although we don't want to think about that. If you have a business, there's a cause for that business. And this is the idea of causal theory. So when you apply it to the universe, where did the universe come from? Where did we come from? And scientists, whether atheist or theist, have long agreed that there must be a cause. Now, this is where the theist and the atheist disagree. The theist says the cause is God. Atheists say it's the universe. It's just random, and there is no God. So about 100 years ago, the Big Bang Theory came into play. And most people believe the Big Bang Theory disproves Christianity. And we'll look at that next week, but I don't believe that's true. I'd say that the Big Bang Theory didn't take the feet out from theologians and theists, but I would say that the Big Bang Theory actually took the feet out from under the atheist. Because atheists had always maintained that the universe is eternal, and it created us. And then suddenly, with the Big Bang Theory, there's this scientifically validated idea that there was a time where there was no space and time. And until that time, science had not believed that was true. Theologians had been asserting that that's true for thousands of years, and suddenly atheists have to wrestle with the Big Bang Theory. How do you explain an infinitely complex universe that began out of nothing? So the Big Bang Theory, it creates a new problem. Can we explain how everything came from nothing? Do we suddenly need to abandon this causal theory? And the way that Mark Clark explains this concept in the book is that nobody times nothing equals everything. That's the assertion, that nobody times nothing equals everything. Francis Collins, he is the director of the Human Genome Project, and he started out life as an atheist. And then he got more involved in the scientific community and started to consider theism. And in his case, something led him to Christ, and now he became a Christian. And so he was responsible for mapping the human genome in our lifetime. Here's what he says. He says, the Big Bang cries out for a divine explanation. It forces the conclusion that nature has a defined beginning. I cannot see how nature could have created itself. Only a supernatural force that is outside of space and time could have done that. And so what he's saying is that as we look at the universe, as we map the human genome, we see an incredible amount of complexity. And it's intelligent. And it all works together, and it begs for a creator. That's the cosmological argument. And this is independent of Scripture. You don't ever have to crack open a Bible or any theological or faith-based book to ask this question. It's just a human existence question. If there's no moral force behind the universe, why are we moral creatures? If the universe was created, what created the universe? Who or what is behind that? So where does this leave us? I know we breezed through a lot of information today, and that's why it's meant to be a dialogue. That's why we will have a discussion group on Monday nights, and we'd love for you to be there and ask your questions. It's why we have a book. We want this to be a discussion, but in closing, I want to have you think about this for a moment. I want to try to boil this down and simplify this idea if I could. So, look at a book. Look at a book. It has, this book in particular has 200 some pages. It's, looks reasonably organized. There's letters that are put together that create words and seem to form some kind of intelligent thought. The pages look pretty much the same. There's a cover and a design and a graphic, and no one, I don't think, in this room believes that this book just randomly assembled. That molecules and particles, they came together and formed this book. No, there was an author. There was a publisher. And to buy the randomness of the universe is kind of like saying a book has no cause, no creator, no intelligent or intentional design, and no meaning. I mean, he's upset about that. So Lee Strobel, he was an atheist who, in his investigation, he moved from atheism to Christianity. And here's what he said. He said, to continue in atheism, I needed to believe nothing produces everything. Non-life produces life. Randomness produces fine-tuning. Chaos produces information. Unconsciousness produces consciousness, and non-reason produces reason. That is a huge leap. And so here's what we want you to do as we engage in this series. Follow where the evidence leads, not where you hope it leads. Be one of the courageous risk takers that's willing to doubt their doubts, that allows new information to reshape the world as they see it. One who looks objectively at the evidence and follows it to its natural conclusion. Would you pray with me? God, we just come before you and acknowledge the complexity of this problem, this idea of your existence, of science and hypocrisy and all of these things that we're going to engage over the next several weeks. There are really smart people with positions on both sides. And so I pray first, God, that you would just allow us to engage in a discussion that is respectful, that is honoring to one another and to divergent viewpoints. But I also pray, God, that you would reveal truth, that you would speak to us, that you would help us follow evidence where it leads and not where we want it to lead. And so, God, we just give this series and these next several weeks to you. Amen.